So happy to have you with us this week on the show. I am reaching back into the archives and pulling back an interview from the Thriving Life Summit to share a conversation that I actually mentioned last week in my top 5 health swaps to transform your life and enjoy better well-being now and long into the future. And I referred to a conversation that I had with Vonda Schaefer, a psychotherapist and nutritionist based here in California, who uses neuronutrient therapy to help us have the building blocks that we need to create the feel-good hormones that help us have the positive emotions we're looking for. So much great information in this conversation. I'm so glad to have you with us and can't wait to hear what you think. Leave a comment at happyfiedlife.com or under the YouTube video if you're catching it here, or join the conversation over in our Live with Less Stress Facebook group. Glad to have you with us this week. Living in a stressful world doesn't mean you have to give up on happiness. Instead, you can shift your perspective of stress and discover how to live your life in flow. Welcome to Happyfied. I'm your host, Susie Vine. Join me for inspiration and interviews with folks who are shining their light in the world in the areas of positive mindset, health, and wellness. I'm so happy to have you here. What if you could maximize your meditation practice with a tool that maximizes your time and attention with images and affirmations carefully selected to boost your positivity, to help you integrate your intentions into your subconscious? I have a special gift available for you. Visit happyfiedlife.com and click on the Start Off Happy button to take a look at the phenomenal technology created by Positive Prime that uses neuroplasticity to literally wire your brain for more happiness, higher productivity, better relationships, and greater success. Head over to the happyfiedlife.com page to start off happy with Positive Prime. Enjoy it free for 30 days. Welcome to today's interview on the Thriving Life Summit. I am Susie Vine, your host, and I am so happy to be joined today in our studio by Vonda Schaefer. Let me introduce, I know you're going to get so much information out of this conversation, and I think a lot of it might be new to you. So welcome along to the show. Vonda is a nutritionist and psychotherapist based out of Solvang, California. Her practice specializes in stabilizing brain chemistry to reduce the constraints of insomnia, fatigue, depression, substance abuse, ADD, anxiety, panic attacks, eating disorders, sleep issues, and other underlying psychological issues. There's a lot of ground to cover here. Vonda has been a licensed and practicing marriage and family therapist for 15 years. She has a master's degree in clinical psychology, an undergraduate degree in nutrition, and is a board-certified holistic nutritionist. So we're really getting the benefit of a lot of different perspectives and education coming together, and this synthesis is just what makes me so excited. So thank you for joining me today, and appreciate you making time.
My pleasure. Thank you, Susie.
And I would love to get a little bit of the picture of how you made that transition, perhaps, or where you saw the connections between nutrition. Obviously, that was a point of interest to you, and these kinds of psychological issues that you see coming together or showing up in practice.
Yeah, it started two ways. One was as I was starting to do psychotherapy with clients, therapy can only get so far. And I just didn't think I could send everybody for a med evaluation. So with my nutrition background, I was thinking, wow, there's got to be another step here before we talk about medication or the need for medication. And so I started looking around and doing research on who's already looked into this, and found a few practitioners, mainly Julia Ross, who wrote a book called The Mood Cure. And I did some training with her, and that was my initial training that kind of got me going. And since then, I've done a lot of other things and diggings, but really being able to help people with food and targeted supplements to help mental health symptoms before we go to medication instead of starting with medication. That's the biggest beginning that I had. The other beginning I had was I was working in a school as a school counselor for a while, and my office was off of the lunchroom, and many of the kids would come in for breakfast and lunch. And I was just watching what they were eating and thinking, I could not even function if I was eating what they were eating. So the processed food, the high sugar cereals. And so it just got me thinking and digging into how food impacts everything.
Ooh, we could go so many ways through this conversation now. That
Yeah.
is such a great point. Because it is, there's so many conversations about how schooling could be easier on kids. So I'll try to avoid that rabbit hole. But certainly, especially 2 out of 3 meals a day, perhaps coming from one source, it definitely stands to reason. Like you can really see a lot of correlations, coming back to how that's shaping their diet when it is so, simple carbohydrates, not getting that rounded nutrition. What are we up to now? 2/3, 3/4 of the plate should be vegetables and fruit. We've come a long way, baby.
Yes, we have come a long way from that initial pyramid. Yeah.
And so I find this so fascinating and really heartening too. And I'm not familiar with Julia Ross's work, but I'm acquainted with some other practitioners in this space. And I feel like, as in so many solutions that could be simple if they were just more widely known, is the conversation we're not having. And in Western medicine, we're kind of in this mentality of file your complaint first with your general practitioner, and then they'll shuttle you somewhere else. You need a referral to navigate our system. And we're good at addressing concerns, but not asking the questions about what's underlying those. So I love that in that space of, you weren't the person to go to the medication options, and just in order to be more equipped to serve your patients, then you were able to make connections, to look a little deeper. And I think that state of curiosity is so important, and a really important thing to look for in the leaders that we seek out, so that we feel like we have a seat at the table and they're not just dictating to us what should work. Take this, call me in 6 weeks, 8 weeks. We'll see where that stands. So thank you for doing that extra work on your behalf, because it could be that simple. It could be some referrals to other practitioners and getting people, looking for the right medication. Even that isn't an easy solution. So do you find people coming into your practice who have been down that route, who have been working with other practitioners who have had them on medications and they're frustrated with that? Or do you tend to work with people who are starting out their therapy journey?
I have had everything in the office. So yes, people do come in who've been on medication for a long time or a short time and aren't getting results, or are actually feeling worse, which we know can happen. And I'm careful with people with medications, and I'm not a doctor, so I never would tell someone not to take their medication or interfere with that. But there's a lot of workarounds we can do. Even if someone is been on a medication for decades and they don't want to touch it with their doctor, fine. There's still things that we can do from a nutritional standpoint and a targeted supplement standpoint. I also have people coming in who have never heard that food or a supplement could actually impact their anxiety or their depression. So we start from the ground up and improving the diet, and then through assessments targeting what symptoms are they're dealing with.
Got you. Beautiful. Yeah. And I agree too. I never mean to sound as if I'm putting Western medicine in the do not use category. I think there's a lot of room for that complementary opportunity. We can remove the pain, and then we can keep on working to get to the root of it. So thank you for kind of giving us just a quick peek to your process. We're going to come right back to that. But you mentioned anxiety and depression. Are those, would you say, the most prevalent that you see coming into your practice, or what are common complaints that people are bringing in?
Well, as you probably know, depression and anxiety can go hand in hand. So I see a lot of that. I'm seeing much more anxiety than ever before. And even in young children and teenagers, of course, as we're all probably aware, but was a word that, people didn't use that word when I was in high school or even college. So it's much more prevalent, and depression is as well. Also, substance use is the big one. We self-medicate. So that comes up pretty frequently, but definitely depression and anxiety are the top contenders.
Got you. And so you mentioned too, first you tend to look at nutrition and make sure that the basics are covered. Where do you tend to find people might be falling short or not getting the basics covered? Are there common areas there that we indulge in or not?
Yeah, I think we've all gotten so much information about our diet that it's confusing, what we really are supposed to eat. And the truth is there isn't one diet for everyone. So I really try to work with people on individualizing their diet and not being very, very strict, because most of us don't, that doesn't last. I'll have them give me a 3 or 5 day food diary and make some small shifts that really can be the beginning of a real shift for them. And the biggest one is, especially when there's any kind of anxiety, or if someone has had a really low depression in the past, balancing their blood sugar is one of the first things we talk about. And that starts with just getting protein and fat in at breakfast. Doesn't matter if they don't have to have breakfast by a certain time, but that first meal kind of sets the metabolism for the day. And so if someone already has mood shifts, getting on the blood sugar roller coaster is just going to exacerbate it. So that's something that you can do. You can do it today and notice a difference. It's not going to be the whole answer, but that is usually a starting point with clients. Anxiety gets worse when our blood sugar drops. So if we're eating a lot of sugar and processed foods, your blood sugar is going to spike, and then it has to drop. When it goes down in the depths, cortisol gets triggered, and that can feel like anxiety for somebody who has panic attacks or who already is dealing with anxiety. So by limiting this up and down, we at least can steady the signals and keep that cortisol more leveled. And in fact, it's an easy way to prevent some anxiety.
Wow. And I just see this whole chicken and egg situation, because stress spikes our cortisol, which spikes our blood sugar. And then in recovery, it bottoms out, and then the cortisol responds. And we don't even need to eat the sugary cereal to be on the roller coaster if we're letting stress take the wheel, right? But that it doesn't help that, just like you say, watching the school lunchroom, it's the cereals or the toast or the Pop-Tarts, right? It's the convenience food that's just carbs. So that's such a good point. The way that you set the day, it's like the $1 million mindset, right? I mean, not only getting centered and balanced to start your day, but getting the right nutrition into your body to prime the pump. I think that's really important information to set your metabolism in the right direction. So that's really helpful. Yeah, the more I learn about how it really is all connected, it just goes deeper and deeper. So fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so in terms of the way that people eat, I mean, there's a matter of convenience. And certainly, like you said, we've been through a lot in these last couple of years. I saw a study early on in COVID where people were working on average 3 hours more per day, which adds up to 2 extra work days in a week. But it certainly compromises. I mean, going shopping was its own adventure. DoorDash thanks us. But having access to quality food and the time to prepare it is a bit of a trick too. So to a degree, lifestyle is a big issue, but also there are some genetic predispositions that tend to set us up to not digest foods or metabolize certain things or even detox very efficiently. Would you say either one is more prevalent, or is it again so connected that it's kind of like untangling the puzzle to see which is affecting what aspect?
Yeah, as you said, everything is connected. And so that's why getting good assessments and good information on that first intake is so valuable, because is it the gut? Are your adrenals contributing to this? If the gut there's something going on in the gut talks to the brain a lot, and the back and forth signals have a lot to do with mood and just the production of neurotransmitters like GABA and serotonin. All of our feel-good neurotransmitters, they're getting signals back and forth. Most of our serotonin is actually made in the gut. So if some of those signals are off, either because of brain injury or because of gut issues, then you're not going to be making what you need to make. So if the gut's a mess, we also have to figure out why, is that because of toxicity? I'm seeing so many people impacted by mold which is a whole rabbit hole I'm sure we don't want to go down, but I can do a lot of healing and working with people on gut issues. But if they're still exposed or if there's mold, then they're not going to really improve. So there's a lot of rabbit holes we could go down with the client, but first we do the simplest things and see how far we get. And if that for maybe 50% of people, that's enough. And their improvement is so extreme from their perspective that we don't need to keep digging.
Yeah, you're so right. I love that we are really starting to finally understand just how powerful an impact it has. And, in our stressful lifestyles, it tends to take our digestion offline. And that is really not helpful when we're already, as you mentioned, having the impact of other toxins in our environment. So thank you for that. And I think that's really surprising to discover. I know I was surprised to find that serotonin and these other important factors rely on the health of the gut.
Mm-hmm.
We're only paying attention to the brain, but there's so much more to pay attention to. So fascinating.
Yeah.
So
I can't tell you how many people come in, even young people who are already on anti-acid medication. And I mean, of course, that's the first sign that, okay, what's going on there? We have to look at that.
Yeah, because that can lead to deficiencies in other areas too, right? It can start to leach other issues. It'd be really hard on our bodies. That's not a long-term solution.
Right. But people are on them really long term. But what was causing that in the beginning? Why did you need to go on that? And there's something to be figured out with that for sure.
So for the most part, for 50% of people, some simple, pretty straightforward shifts can help. And it does take some fine tuning. Not everybody thrives on a plant-based diet. And, some people, it always varies, but are there some core recommendations you find yourself saying over and over again that we probably should have learned in grade school, but we've missed it in our education? Some things that we could start with and see how things might shift if we're feeling a little lower than usual or feeling a little triggered?
Yeah, I mean, I think that those simple things aren't usually enough for people who walk in who are in my office. Remember, if you're going to therapy, there's likely some kind of symptoms that you're already getting in the way of life. I mean, the simple things are improving the diet and lowering alcohol use and moving your body. So we've all heard that for years and years, right? But if someone's really depressed and having trouble even getting out of bed or getting through work, telling them to exercise and eat better, that takes energy and motivation and things they don't usually have. So with those people, which is very common, what I do is have them fill out my handy dandy assessment sheet, which has been fine-tuned by Julia Ross, the author that I mentioned. She had a clinic for a long time and basically fine-tuned this assessment form and has allowed us practitioners to use it, giving her credit. But it's an excellent form based on the symptoms that each neurotransmitter in the brain, or the primary ones. There's a lot more than what we address, but the primary ones that control depression symptoms, anxiety symptoms, that need for reward, that dopamine and endorphin need. And by targeting those symptoms that someone in their assessment tells me that there's an issue with, like, for example, serotonin. Wow, if they have like high scores in that section on those symptoms, then we try an amino acid that works on building up serotonin. There's literally a supplement that's over the counter that converts to serotonin in your body. So we don't have to manipulate it with medication, or maybe we do, but first, why don't we try to just build it up and see how that goes? So sometimes the simplest solutions are the best. And so I usually start with that. And once people are feeling a little better, they work very quickly, not like if they don't have to build up like medication, you get a fast result. Then they have the motivation to start cooking more, to start changing their sleep patterns, to actually take a walk. So that's usually where we start. And I know some practitioners say, I'm not even going to see you if you're not going to be gluten-free, if you're not going to be exercising and doing this. But the people that come in to see me can't start there.
Exactly. And I am so grateful that you recognize that. And I hope that your patients are as well, because change is hard and it's so easy to get overwhelmed when you hear something like, I have to take on a whole new exercise plan. I have to take on a whole new way of eating. I have to throw out everything in my cabinets. Like we're starting already from a place of deprivation or sacrifice and already feeling overwhelmed. Just like you say, there's a reason that they're sitting in the chair. They didn't come in on a strong day. And so I love that these little shifts can start to open up the space to bring in more practices, the habits that will continue the recovery. Because when our body is getting what it needs, it wants to be in balance. It doesn't choose to perpetuate that state of imbalance. So that's terrific. And I love that it's a questionnaire. I find it so helpful in working with my clients to have them sit in that space and just get into that awareness. Sometimes it's overwhelming because sometimes there's a lot of yeses on the list, which doesn't feel good initially. But then it's a great benchmark too, when they get to evaluate themselves and look back and say, this isn't relevant to me anymore. I've shifted from all of that, because as things start to change, sometimes it's so subtle, we forget where we've come from.
Right. Yeah. It's so great to go back and say, wow, how high would you rate lack of motivation? Oh, that's a 2 or 3. Well, you had it at a 9 before and you don't remember feeling bad. So it is really helpful to have that.
Yeah, terrific. And I think it's heartening too to recognize that with that clarity, with a little point in direction, okay, it's probably these culprits here. So these supplements are very effective. And you mentioned amino acids helping the body to create it. So, maybe we don't have, the cells aren't functioning the way that we need to. We can get that engine humming again, by providing these supplements. So in terms of the amino acids, are there some that you tend to go with? I'm fascinated by this. I'm not very familiar with the correlation. Like, who kicks serotonin?
Oh, yeah.
A bunch of names that'll leave our heads
Everyone's going to want that one.
Start with a questionnaire. Don't go out and start knocking down the shelves at CVS.
Right. Start with the questionnaire and also watch what brands you're getting. Don't get generic brands because there's 2 different kinds of depression. There's probably a lot more, but in how it presents. But an apathetic depression is different than a low serotonin depression, which is more of a negative. Life is never going to work out, glasses half empty all the time. That's a low serotonin depression. And also it's full of worry and anxiety and sleep issues and cravings for sugar. So the questionnaire is very helpful in weeding that out. That's different than an unmotivated, can't get out of bed. That's a low catecholamine depression. So it's really helpful to kind of filter that. And with the amino acids, you're either going to feel better right away, you're going to notice something, or you're not. And if you get the dosing right, then, always start with the lowest dose. But if you start with a low dose and then you don't feel better, you can increase the dose a little bit and see if there's kind of a magic dose, just like there's a magic amount of food that makes us feel satisfied. Amino acids are received by the body as food. So 5-HTP and tryptophan are the supplements that ultimately convert in the body to serotonin. And then the low catecholamine depression, the more unmotivated, I can't get out of bed, is helped by tyrosine, which is also an amino acid.
I just think it's so exciting to understand that, if folks were working with the right practitioner who was asking the right questions, they could have relief as close as going to the drugstore and knowing which supplements to choose, instead of having to try different medications and seeing which one of those might work and for how long. Because as you said, sometimes over time, what does work stops working, so it can be difficult.
Right. And there is a type of depression that is associated with low folate levels. This is based on Dr. William Walsh's work. And he has a wonderful book called Nutrient Power. And so in low folate depression, there's often, if not always, a adverse reaction to SSRIs. So those are the people that don't tolerate medication, have really bad side effects, and don't get the benefit. of it.
Wouldn't it be great to bypass that with a questionnaire?
Or as Dr. Walsh has been pushing for years, how about just a blood test to check folate levels? It's not that hard, but hopefully we'll get there.
Yes. It takes enough of us asking the right questions. So take that one to your general practitioners, friends.
Yeah. And
Ask your doc.
psychiatrists for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Because it's really a question of we don't know what we don't know. And so it's so helpful when someone like you has devoted their practice, their attention to cultivating the resources that really make a shift. Because there's so many people, it's so easy now to self-publish or to get your own website or launch a podcast and declare yourself an expert, which I try to be very careful not to do, because it's so important to know that science changes, that information changes, and that staying current is so important. It's okay to admit, things change, data has been proven wrong, and we get to move forward with a whole new playing field if we're willing to let go of what isn't working.
Yeah. And everybody is an individual. So nobody walks out with the same. I don't think I've ever done the exact same protocol for anybody. There's always things we're looking at, shifting, changing, trying, and it's individualized. When you're doing a study, you have maybe 200 people that are all have their own individualized chemistries and genes and history, environment. So that's the exciting part, though, is just I really enjoy working with one-on-one, getting somebody's individual history and challenges and
cracking the code. And then once you've got people on a better track, some of those nutrition pitfalls are resolved. They're maybe using some of the supplements that will help to bridge the gap and boost us where we're deficient. Do you see the body come into balance so that they ultimately don't need them? Or is this something that they're perhaps going to continue to need to call on?
Yeah, both. So some people, if somebody's already on a really clean diet, they don't need them for very long at all. Everything goes, I'm sure you see as well, everything goes quickly, everything gets better fast and stays that way. Amino acids are interesting because they're restorative, but if you have enough in your body and then you keep taking it, you actually could feel like somewhat of a subtle adverse reaction. For example, if you don't need 5-HTP anymore, you might start getting tired from it. And that's kind of the body saying, I don't need this anymore. So ideally, yes, most people don't need to take them anymore. There are a lot of exceptions, especially with clients that I work with who have family history of, lots of anxiety, lots of depression. Maybe there's a suicide in their family history, lots of substance abuse or eating disorders. Those are people that probably there's a genetic component and they're going to need to keep taking them. Or if people aren't willing to change their diet, which of course there's going to be people that aren't, then, you have to compensate somewhere. So you're probably going to keep needing to keep taking them. But the body's fascinating, as you know, and when it gets full, it tells you, just like, when to stop eating. Most people, there's a signal that it's like, okay, 1 steak is nice, but 2 is too many. So yeah, it's listening to the body. And yes, the amino acids are restorative.
Beautiful. And I appreciate that too. There are genetic predispositions that will continue to need support. And, it's really heartening to see that conversation too, turning to epigenetics, where we might be predisposed to struggle in some areas, and with the support to give our energy and bring our willpower back, right? When we're feeling better, we can start to improve the rest of the influences on our health so that we aren't so subject to the influence of those genes that might not be ideal. Yes.
Yeah. The genes aren't, as your listeners may know, that the genes aren't indicative, that it's not for sure that you're going to have an issue if you have, say, GAD, which is GAD. It's a gene that has a lot to do with anxiety. But just because you have an impairment on that gene doesn't mean you're going to have anxiety. You're more predisposed to it, but really the environment, the stress that you've been in or not been in impacts that a lot.
And I'm curious too, so what are some common environmental influences or impacts that you've seen as people start healing? Where are some of the ways that we're running into obstacles that are hurting our own balance? I'm a big fan of being aware of the pesticides and avoiding those. Really helps to start bringing the gut, microbiome back into balance, especially if we've had infections and antibiotic series in the past. But what other kinds of things do you see impacting ultimately the way that we feel?
Yeah. I mean, the biggest one is stress. We're so stressed. I have a course that I do for practitioners. And one of the things I talk about is history. I've read a lot of memoirs and history. And if you look at history, this is not the most stressful time we've lived in. I mean, there was one generation that lived through 2 wars and a depression and not enough food. And this is not the most stressful period of history by far. But are we more stressed than our ancestors? Yes, we are. So managing stress, figuring out some kind of balance is huge. And everyone's heard that so many times that I think they don't even listen to it anymore. That comes up a lot in my therapy practice. It's like, if you're going to keep living like this, then your health is going to continue to be an issue. That's just 1 + 1 = 2. So definitely stress, and food and your diet can be stressful or nurturing on the body. So a high sugar, high, inflammation prone diet is stress. And that is the biggest, I would say that is absolutely the biggest contributor. What we're feeding our kids, what teens are eating, what kids are eating in college, and then, our fast-paced adults picking up food and doing like pre-made things. So the diet is probably number one. Other environmental factors, of course, the mold thing is popping up a lot. And I don't think it's because we have more moldy buildings than ever. I think it's more that our bodies are just not as happy, and we're not able to deal with it as much. I mean, mold's been a part of life and nature forever. So plastics has probably come up in other interviews. Plastics is huge. Drinking out of plastic bottles. A lot of us thought bottled water was better for a long time, and people are still buying cases of plastic bottles. It's a very big endocrine disruptor, and the endocrine system is all connected. So if one part of it's not working, and then it overloads your detox, and you can't deal with the day-to-day impact. All of us are impacted by our environment, and we need detox is a really important process in our body. So those are the big ones, I think. And medications, we have to detox medications. So people come in and they have a list of 8 medications. It's not that uncommon to have a list of 8, and the liver has to detox that. So it impacts what else the liver is able to do.
Exactly. There's only so much work it can do in the course of a day. So if it's filtering the medications plus the contents of the food that we're eating, those culinary chemicals I did have a great conversation with Dr. Ailey Cohen, and then it came up again as I was talking with Dr. Tracy Gappin. So those endocrine disrupting chemicals keep turning up.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've even seen on the government websites now, they're acknowledging the impact of endocrine disrupting chemicals. There's certainly not volunteering warnings or cautions. So there's a lot of evidence behind it if it's there, but it's buried on these websites. We all were aware when BPA went out of baby bottles, but we're not paying attention to the fact that it's still in the cans of the food that we eat or the drinks that we drink. And, it's still in food packaging to a great extent. So they do all add up. And to your point earlier, if people are already on a cleaner diet, then your intervention is able to take effect so much more quickly because the body hasn't been already compromised by all of this that it's trying to carry.
Right.
Yeah. I talk about the sneaky stressors, right? Because we get used to carrying that load. We don't recognize the impact of it. What we recognized was we can't tolerate as much stress when it shows up, but we're not curious about why we can't tolerate what otherwise should be a normal level of stress. So I love that
Right.
analogy. We're not living through the worst of days. We're just already stretched thin.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do you see quality of sleep impacted or benefited as you're working with people to balance out the neurotransmitters as well? Is that another chicken and egg situation?
Oh, absolutely. Sleep is on the assessment list. And I ask a lot of questions about sleep. Are you waking up in the middle of the night? Are you having trouble going to sleep? Because all of those answers pinpoint potential problems. If someone just is ruminating and thinking about, stress, simply GABA, which is our body's natural Valium, and also comes in a supplement, can quiet the mind and bring the body down a notch just so that people can sleep. So there are some really simple solutions, and we try those first. Being low in serotonin often will impact your sleep because serotonin is how the body makes its own melatonin. So if melatonin is fabulously working for you, you're probably either low in serotonin or you're missing the nutrients to do the conversion. So sleep is the whole topic in itself, but there are some simple solutions that, tryptophan at night, GABA at night, or GABA if you're waking up in the middle of the night, that can be completely solve the problem. If they don't work, then we go, to a deeper level. Is it hormone stuff? Are you drinking too much? All of those things.
Got you. There's so much. There are all these factors. And I love that, that you're okay with sitting in that space. I mean, I think as practitioners, we have to be, but people expect there's one thing. Just tell me the one thing that I have to change. And it's not an easy answer. Just like, the solution might not be immediate, but a shift is a powerful start. And to hear you say too, that finding the right supplement that could bring you back into balance could bring you relief even more quickly than medication, which, right, as you need to titrate that up and make the tweaks and adjustments, it can be easier than that if you get yourself set on the right path instead of let me try this and this and this and this. And because just as to your point, people can be on a shopping list of medications. It's not unusual, this to balance out the impact of that one. And then the list goes on. But I've also seen people with the box of supplements because I heard about this and I tried this and I heard about this. And then you've got to unwind all of that too.
People are doing their own research and trying a lot of things. And I've just recently had 2 clients where I had to say, take a break. You've got to trust me and give me a chance. You can't keep adding, all this stuff in. I have to know what you're taking and we have to work together. I'm also seeing a lot of companies now targeting symptoms on their supplement bottles, sleep, tranquility, or whatever. And it's a combination of a lot of supplements, which when I take a look at what people are taking, some of them could be problematic that are thrown in with the mix. So if somebody's taking a lot, we have to do some shifting about that as well. And fillers, people that are just picking up generic or inexpensive brands, never buy the cheapest supplement form. I had 2 older ladies who both had brought me their kind of list, and the fillers and the junk that they were getting every day in their supplements, we had to revamp that really quickly. So look at the ingredients, see what you're actually getting. It's really important.
Truly, truly. Thank you for bringing that up because it's so important. And I've heard of people buying, looking for the best deal on Amazon and getting, repackaged products, not getting what they were purchasing. So diligence is very important.
Always have that conversation with clients. Please don't buy them on Amazon. You don't really know who the seller is. You don't know where they're coming from. And there has been studies done on probiotics in particular, and they weren't what they were supposed to be. You can make a lot of money selling supplements with cheap something or other in the capsule. So yeah, I hope that's coming up in other talks too.
And I want to make sure we highlight what you have available to share with the people who are part of our audience.
Yes, I do. I'm a CEU provider for psychotherapists, for psychologists, and several other professions. So I have a 2-day course that is designed for practitioners on bringing nutrition into the clinical setting. And it's not just nutrition, but everything we've been touching on with the amino acids and how to use them and when not to use them and all of that. But I have a course that I think it's about 45 minutes. It's a primer called Nutritherapy. And it's a primer basically for anybody, layperson, somebody who's never heard of the amino acids before. It's perfect for that. You can do your own assessment, and it talks about which supplements to try for that and how to do it, where to start with dosing, and how to do the trial effectively on yourself. So yeah, so that's on my website, Nutrition is Therapy. Yeah.
Knowledge is power, because I'm sure as people have been listening in on our conversation, they've been curious and, well, can I get started on my own? Obviously, if you have had issues going on for quite a while, Vonda is a perfect person to reach out to and get some perspective and support moving through your healing process. And it's so heartening to know that you can start to get an idea, you can get a little clarity, and that we can have some power with some valid information to move ourselves in a better direction. And I want to thank you so much again for being available and for sharing your information, because your experience is priceless, because, you know, it's so important to keep on digging below the easy or first answer. Is there anything else that we didn't have a chance to take a quick look at, or any parting thoughts you'd like to leave with us today?
There's more information on my website. I do have a blog that has some case studies, and as you and I discussed, there's an article in there on 10 contributors to anxiety that will surprise you. There's a lot of info on there on the blog. So take a look at that. The website's Nutrition is Therapy. And if anybody wants to get trained and, you know, start taking this to the next level in their own practice, I really would love to talk with them about that too.
Yes. This is such an important message to be spread and carried forward. So if you know someone who this information would benefit, I hope that you'll pass that along. And I was so grateful to you for making yourself available. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie.
Thanks for joining us today. To learn more about living life with less stress and more flow, visit happifiedlife.com. Subscribe on your favorite player to catch the next episode as soon as it's out. Sharing really is caring, so please rate and review the show while you're there. And if you know someone else who would love it, please pass it along. Until next time, my friends, keep on shining.